Psalm 30. God lifts you out. Every pit prepared for you is closed forever. There comes a time in every believer's life when darkness seems to close in from every side. You feel the weight of despair, betrayal, or loss pressing heavily upon your soul. It is in such moments that Psalm 30 speaks with divine clarity, a psalm not of defeat, but of deliverance. King David, once buried under anguish, sings of a God who lifts him out of every pit, of a Father who turns mourning into dancing, and of a Redeemer who closes forever the traps that enemies prepared. Psalm 30 isn't merely a song of gratitude, it is a prophetic declaration of God's nature. It proclaims a pattern of heaven. No matter what pit is dug before you, no matter how deep the despair, the same God who lifted David will lift you. You lifted me out of the grave, David says, and that same lifting power still moves in the lives of the faithful today. To understand the magnitude of this psalm, one must first see that the pit is not only literal, but spiritual. It represents defeat, shame, failure, and spiritual death. Every believer faces pits, but this psalm assures us that they will not become our tombs. The hand of God does not only save, it seals the enemy's work forever. Every plot that was designed to destroy you becomes a closed grave from which no curse can rise again. As we journey through this reflection, let us remember, God does not only deliver, He restores, reverses, and redeems. What the enemy meant for destruction, God transforms into testimony. The same voice that spoke light into existence speaks still, and when He speaks, every weapon formed loses its power, and every pit closes forever. When God speaks, the depths tremble. When David wrote, "O Lord, you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me," he was not merely thanking God for rescue, he was confessing the authority of the divine word. God's voice alone carries the power to overturn the course of events. When He speaks, depths tremble. No pit, no prison, no chain can resist the command of the Almighty. In the ancient world, a pit symbolized death, despair, or humiliation. Many were thrown into pits to die forgotten. Joseph by his brothers, Jeremiah by the wicked, Daniel by envious men. Yet in every story, God's voice descended deeper than the darkness. He did not only rescue, He rewrote destinies. Joseph was lifted to rule a nation. Jeremiah's words still burn across centuries. Daniel became a prophet through whom kingdoms were measured. This is the nature of divine rescue. It is not partial, it is transformative. When God lifts you, He doesn't just restore you to where you were. He elevates you to where you were always meant to be. David had known the darkness of rejection, the pain of pursuit, and the shame of sin. But he also knew the voice of mercy that speaks louder than condemnation. When he cried out, "Lord, you brought me up from the realm of the dead," he was acknowledging that divine intervention goes beyond human strength. It is God's declaration that the story is not over until He says it is. You may find yourself in a pit of anxiety, a valley of loss, or a trap of betrayal. But remember, God's word still speaks into the void. Just as He spoke, "Let there be light," He now speaks into your circumstance. Come out. And when He speaks, every force of hell must obey. The pits you were meant to die in become sealed graves of your old self. The enemies who thought you would never rise will watch in silence as God's hand lifts you in ways no one can explain. This psalm reveals that divine lifting is not a gradual process. It is an act of command. God does not negotiate with your enemies. He does not bargain with darkness. He speaks, and creation realigns. When He says, "Be lifted," the pit becomes powerless. The soil that covered your potential begins to shake, and your name is whispered again in heavenly courts. The voice that spoke to Lazarus echoes still, "Come forth." But this lifting requires something from you. Faith in the unseen hand. Faith that even when you can't feel the movement, the command has already gone forth. Every prayer uttered in tears becomes the seed of resurrection. Every silent night is a stage being set for dawn. Psalm 30 teaches that weeping endures for a night, but joy comes with the morning. Not because the night was short, but because God decreed the morning. Night does not surrender by choice, it surrenders by command. If God has spoken over your life, then no pit can define your ending. Every trap will close, but you will rise. Every curse will end, but your praise will continue. And when you stand above the place where you once wept, you will know. The depths have heard his voice and trembled. So lift your heart and declare today, God is lifting me out. Even if the walls of the pit seem high, even if the ground beneath you feels cold, his hand is already reaching for you. The pit you fell into will become the platform from which you testify. He is not just a God of rescue, he is a God of reversal. He closes every pit the enemy planned. The story that began with pain will end in praise. If this message has spoken to your spirit, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Stay connected to the word that keeps your soul lifted. The night of weeping and the morning of rising. There are seasons in life when everything seems to collapse at once, when the voice of joy that once filled your heart is silenced by storms that refuse to end. It is in those hours that the promise of Psalm 30 shines like a lamp in a cave. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. This is not poetic consolation, it is a divine law woven into the fabric of faith. Every night of tears has a morning of resurrection waiting on God's command. The night can be long, heavy, suffocating even, but it is not eternal. And the same God who allowed the night will summon the dawn. David had known that night. He had watched friends betray him, enemies multiply, and his own strength fail. He had cried out from the depths of guilt and grief, from the silence of isolation, from the wounds that seemed beyond healing. But the same lips that confessed sorrow would soon sing thanksgiving. Because even while David was surrounded by darkness, heaven was preparing light. That is how God works. While your tears fall, he builds your tomorrow. While your heart breaks, he arranges your restoration. While you sleep through pain, he calls forth a morning that your eyes have not yet seen. The pit is always cold, but it is never final. The hand of God is never late. He waits until your soul is silent enough to hear him, until pride has died, until surrender is complete. Then he moves, and what seemed buried becomes resurrected. Psalm 30 is the story of this divine rhythm, the descent into sorrow and the lifting into joy. When David says, "You turned my mourning into dancing," he is not describing a gentle shift. He is describing a divine reversal. The same place where tears fell becomes the stage for praise. The same mouth that trembled in fear declares victory. Every believer must understand this spiritual cycle. The night of weeping is not punishment, it is preparation. God allows certain nights so that the soul learns what daylight cannot teach. In darkness, faith becomes pure. In silence, trust becomes real. In loneliness, the believer learns that God's presence is enough. The pit, therefore, is not your grave, it is your classroom. And though it feels like abandonment, it is actually transformation. Imagine David in that pit of despair, his kingdom slipping away, his sins exposed, his enemies rejoicing. To the human eye, it looked like the end. But in heaven's design, it was the threshold of something greater. Because before God lifts a person publicly, he breaks them privately. The morning of joy is born in the night of surrender. The scripture says, his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. This is a key to understanding divine discipline. God may allow the sting of correction, but he never abandons his children to wrath. His anger is momentary, his favor is eternal. The weeping of the night is a shadow of that momentary correction. It refines, humbles, and cleanses. But the morning joy is the fruit of favor. It rebuilds, restores, and reaffirms your identity as chosen. There are believers who mistake their night for rejection. They think God has turned away when, in truth, He is nearer than ever. The night is not absence, it is intimacy. It is God whispering in ways daylight distractions could never permit. When David cried, "Hear me, O Lord, and have mercy upon me," God heard not because David was perfect, but because his heart was broken enough to be honest. Heaven always bends toward honesty. The cry that comes from the depths of the soul pierces through the veil of despair. If you are living through your night of weeping, remember, every tear is counted. God does not waste pain. Each drop that falls is recorded in His book. There is no silent suffering in the kingdom. There is only preparation for joy. The same hands that permitted the breaking are already shaping your rising. When dawn comes, it does not apologize for the night. It simply replaces it. Joy does not erase pain. It redeems it. The wounds you carry become proof that God healed you. The scars become testimonies of His mercy, and when you dance again, it will not be a shallow happiness. It will be a deep, unshakable joy born from survival. That is why David could sing, "You clothe me with gladness." The garments of sorrow were removed. The fragrance of life replaced the scent of despair. There is something sacred about divine lifting. God does not just restore what was lost. He adds glory to the restoration. He makes your enemies witnesses of your vindication. Every pit becomes a closed chapter. Every humiliation becomes a doorway to honor. Because God's justice is never partial. When He lifts you, He settles every debt of the past. And yet, lifting requires patience. The night will not rush to end just because you demand it. It will end when heaven declares it. That is why faith must not be measured by how quickly the situation changes, but by how deeply you trust while waiting. The longer the night, the brighter the dawn. Some resurrections take time because they are meant to be public, undeniable, unforgettable. God does not lift you in secret when He intends to glorify His name through your story. David's deliverance became a song for generations because his suffering was not wasted. It was written into divine scripture. So too, your pain is not wasted. It will become the foundation of someone else's faith. Your testimony will remind others that God still turns nights into mornings. It is easy to sing when the sun is shining, but it is in the night that true worship is born. In those hours when all is stripped away, you learn what cannot be shaken. You discover that even if the world collapses, His mercy remains. That is why David could say, "To you, O Lord, I will give thanks forever." Gratitude was not an emotion, it was his weapon. Gratitude in darkness confuses the enemy. While he expects despair, he hears praise. While he waits for surrender, he sees worship. That is the power of Psalm 30. It teaches us to sing not after deliverance, but through it. Every hallelujah in pain is a declaration that the pit has already lost. Every word of faith spoken in the night accelerates the dawn. There will come a morning when you will look back and barely recognize the person who once wept. The pit will be closed, the chains gone, the silence broken by laughter. And you will understand why God allowed the night to prove that His light cannot be extinguished. In that morning, you will not only be lifted, you will carry others with your story. You will speak of how God met you in the lowest place and how He turned ashes into beauty. And the world will know that no weapon, no betrayal, no curse can keep down a soul that God has chosen to raise. For even when your tears fall unseen, heaven is moving mountains on your behalf. The divine clock is ticking toward your morning. The same voice that called light out of darkness will call joy out of sorrow, peace out of pain, life out of loss. So stand firm, even if the night feels endless. It is only a passage, not a prison. It is the shadow before the sunrise, not the end of the story. The pit may have tried to bury you, but it has only positioned you for resurrection. Your enemies may gloat for a moment, but their laughter will fade when God begins to move. because when the Lord rises on your behalf, no one can stand against you. When he says, "Enough," the storm ceases, the pit seals, the dawn breaks. Every believer who walks through darkness must learn this. Faith does not deny pain, it declares purpose. You are not in that pit by accident. You are there because God intends to display his power. He will not only lift you out, he will make you a symbol of his faithfulness. When joy finally comes, it comes multiplied. It carries the weight of every tear, the memory of every prayer, the proof of every unseen battle. It is a joy that cannot be shaken, because it was born in pain and sealed by faith. You may have thought that night destroyed you, but it was shaping you. You may have thought the pit silenced you, but it was teaching you the language of heaven. Praise in suffering, trust in silence, surrender in loss. When you rise, you will not rise as the same person. You will rise as one who knows God not by stories, but by experience. You will know that he is faithful, not because someone told you, but because he came for you. That is the miracle of Psalm 30. It turns theology into testimony. It takes belief and makes it sight. It proves that God's promises are not poetic, they are living, and every believer who clings to them will see them fulfilled. If tonight feels unbearable, hold on. Morning is closer than you think. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared. And when God lifts you, every pit that tried to claim you will close forever. The same God who spoke to David still speaks to you. He has not changed. His mercy endures, his favor surrounds, his word cannot fail. So lift your eyes toward heaven. The night will end. The tears will dry, the story will shift, and the same voice that said, "Let there be light," will whisper into your darkness, "Rise." And when you rise, nothing will drag you back. Every pit that once held you will be sealed beneath the weight of his glory. Every enemy that watched your fall will witness your return, and your song will echo through the ages. The Lord lifted me out, and he closed the pit forever. This is your promise. This is your prophecy. And this is your moment to believe that the night cannot last forever when God has already prepared your morning. If this message has strengthened your faith, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Remain connected to the voice that reminds your spirit that dawn always comes for those who wait on God. Divine restoration. When God rebuilds what was torn down. Every story of deliverance written in Scripture carries within it a deeper message. God not only rescues, he restores. His salvation is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of transformation. Psalm 30 reveals this truth in its very heartbeat. You restored me to life. These words are not merely poetic. They describe an act of divine reconstruction, where everything broken, stripped, and shattered by the darkness is rebuilt by the light of grace. When God lifts a person out of the pit, he does not merely remove them from danger. He re-establishes their foundation, renews their spirit, and clothes them with glory that surpasses what they had before. Restoration is not a return to what once was. It is the unveiling of what was always meant to be. The enemy seeks to destroy, to dig pits that consume. But God's response is not to simply refill those pits. It is to raise from them something greater. When he restores, he does so with increase, with abundance, with depth. The believer who has walked through the valley of despair emerges with a heart made stronger, eyes made clearer, and faith made unbreakable. David's journey captures this mystery perfectly. He began as a shepherd, chosen but underestimated. He faced rejection, betrayal, and sin that tore his soul apart. Yet the same man who once cried, "I am in the depths," would later sing, "You turned my mourning into dancing." This turning is not symbolic. It is the very motion of divine restoration. What was torn down by the weight of sin or suffering becomes rebuilt through mercy. What seemed impossible becomes visible through grace. When God begins his work of restoration, he starts with the unseen, the heart. Before changing your surroundings, he changes your soul. Before reopening doors, he renews your strength. That is why many people misinterpret the waiting period after deliverance. They expect immediate prosperity, but God knows that true restoration begins within. He does not rebuild on the same soil of fear or pride. He prepares new ground, breaking old roots, healing unseen wounds, and laying down a foundation that cannot be shaken again. The process can be painful because restoration always requires removal. God must tear away what cannot carry your future. He removes relationships, opportunities, and habits that belong to the old season. He allows silence so you can hear his design. He exposes the false structures you once depended on so you can lean only on him. And in doing so, he begins to build something eternal. The pit that once imprisoned you becomes the very ground where new strength grows. In that soil of tears and prayer, the Spirit plants endurance, humility, and faith. When you rise again, it is not as one who merely survived, but as one who was reborn. That is the power of Psalm 30. It does not celebrate escape. It celebrates transformation. God does not return you to the same position. He promotes you beyond it. When Joseph rose from his pit, he was not sent back to the fields. He was sent to the palace. When Daniel rose from the lion's den, he was not just spared. He was honored before the king. When Jesus rose from the tomb, he was not simply alive, he was glorified, victorious over death. Every divine lifting is followed by a divine elevation. This is why the believer must not despair during seasons of breaking. The same God who allows the tearing down is preparing the rebuilding. He never leaves anything halfway. If he began to lift you, he will also establish you. But you must allow him to shape the rebuilding according to his design, not yours. Many believers want restoration but resist change. They want resurrection but without crucifixion. Yet every resurrection is preceded by surrender. The night must end before the morning can rise. When God restores, he also redeems the time. The years that seemed wasted are not lost. They are repurposed. He takes your failures and turns them into wisdom. He takes your losses and converts them into testimony. He takes your scars and transforms them into proof of his mercy. In his hands, even the wasted years bear fruit. What you thought was delay was preparation. What you thought was punishment was positioning. God's restoration is complete because it rewrites your past, redefines your present, and realigns your future. David says, "You kept me alive so I would not go down to the pit." This means restoration is not only about renewal, it is about preservation. God did not just bring him out, he sealed the door behind him. Every pit that once called your name becomes forever closed when God restores you. What tried to pull you back loses its voice. The sin that once controlled you no longer finds access because God does not lift without closing what he lifted you from. Many fear returning to their old battles, but Psalm 30 reminds us that divine restoration comes with divine sealing. When God delivers you, he does not only change your situation, he changes your nature. He builds walls of righteousness where there were once walls of fear. He places peace where there was once chaos. He guards you with his presence. And when he guards you, no weapon formed against you can succeed. Restoration also carries recognition. God vindicates the faithful in the eyes of those who doubted them. When David was restored, the same people who once saw him broken saw him crowned again. But the difference was this. Before, David's glory was his own. After restoration, his glory reflected God's. That is the ultimate purpose of restoration, that God's name be glorified through your life. The world must see not only that you rose, but who lifted you. This is why your pain was so public, because your restoration will be too. The same stage that hosted your fall will now host your victory. The same witnesses that mocked your weakness will witness your strength. The pit was not the end. It was the preparation for a public demonstration of God's power. But divine restoration is not effortless. It demands obedience. When God rebuilds, He calls you to walk differently. The restored cannot live like the broken once did. You must protect what God has rebuilt. You must guard your heart, discipline your thoughts, and stay anchored in prayer, because restoration without vigilance can lead to another fall. God's desire is not to lift you only once, but to keep you lifted. The psalmist says, "To you, O Lord, I will give thanks forever." Gratitude is the key that preserves restoration. Those who forget where they came from risk returning there. Praise keeps your heart humble. It reminds you that you did not climb out of the pit by strength, but by grace. And as long as you remain grateful, your restoration will remain intact. To live restored means to live differently. It means to walk with new vision, to speak with new authority, to forgive where once you resented, to trust where once you doubted. It means to turn your past pain into present compassion. When God restores, He expects you to become a channel of restoration for others. You become a living psalm, a testimony that sings, "He lifted me up, and now I will lift others." That is the beauty of divine restoration. It never ends with you. The blessing multiplies, the joy spreads. The faith that was once fragile becomes a fire that lights others. Every person who sees you will sense that you carry something holy, not because you are flawless, but because you have been forgiven much. David's restoration birthed a generation of worshippers. His deliverance became music that still heals hearts today. That is what God desires to do with your story. He wants to make your restoration eternal, to turn your survival into a song that crosses time. You may think you are simply being rescued, but heaven is writing history through you. The God who restores does not make replicas. He makes masterpieces. He does not return you to what you lost. He creates something greater out of what remains. That is why you must never mourn the past beyond its lesson. Let go of what died, for what God is building cannot fit into what was buried. Restoration is resurrection with purpose. Every part of you that fell will rise, but in glory. Every wound will close, but with wisdom. Every fear will fade, but with faith. You will not simply return, you will reign. Because the God who lifts also establishes. Psalm 30 ends not with relief, but with rejoicing. The final line says, "That my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent." Silence was the language of the pit. Praise is the language of restoration. Once God lifts you, you cannot remain silent. You must tell of His mercy, not as a duty but as a joy. Your life itself becomes a song of deliverance. And this song never ends. It continues every day you wake up and breathe the air of freedom. It echoes every time you forgive instead of retaliate, every time you choose faith over fear, every time you remember that the pit is closed and grace has won. The enemy's greatest loss is not your pain, it is your praise, because when you praise after pain, you prove that He failed. You prove that God's hand is stronger, His word surer, His purpose unbreakable. So let your heart rise today. Even if the rebuilding feels slow, trust the process. Even if you cannot see the full picture, trust the architect. The same God who designed the universe is designing your restoration. And when He is finished, not even the memory of the pit will hold you. You will stand where you once fell, and you will lift your hands in worship. The same lips that cried will now declare, "The Lord has done great things for me." And every closed pit will serve as proof that nothing can undo what God has decreed. He lifted you out, and what He lifts, He never lets fall again. If this message has renewed your faith, subscribe to this channel. Remain connected to the Word that rebuilds what the enemy tried to destroy. The power of God's hand, when heaven fights for you. When Psalm 30 declares that you lifted me out of the depths, it does not speak of a gentle or distant act. It speaks of the sheer power of God's hand reaching into a world that could not save itself. That hand, stronger than fear, faster than despair and holier than anything we can imagine, intervenes when human help is gone. It is the same hand that shaped creation, divided the seas, and silenced storms. It is the hand that still moves today, unseen yet undeniable. When God's hand fights for you, nothing, no enemy, no curse, no force can stand against it. We often think of spiritual battles as wars we must fight alone. But the truth is, the greatest victories are won not by our striving, but by our surrender. The same David who once relied on his sling learned that real triumph comes when God's hand becomes your strength. "You hid your face, and I was dismayed," he said, acknowledging that even the bravest warrior collapses without divine favor. Yet when that hand returns, when God stretches forth his arm in power, the earth itself shifts. That is the secret behind every miraculous deliverance. The battle is not yours, it is the Lord's. There are moments when life becomes too heavy, when you feel trapped in situations you cannot fix. The mind tries, the body tires, and the soul begins to faint. You pray, but the heavens seem silent. You try to move forward, but the pit pulls harder. In those moments, faith whispers, "Be still, for God's hand has not withdrawn." You cannot see it yet, but it is already working. It moves beyond time, rearranging what men cannot reach. It enters the heart of those who wronged you and unsettles their peace until justice is done. It touches what was dying and commands it to live. When God's hand moves, his people rise. It is not a question of if, but when. No chain forged by darkness can resist divine touch. In Exodus, the Israelites saw Pharaoh's army approaching, their hearts collapsing under fear. They had nowhere to run, no power to fight. Yet Moses said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord," and the waters obeyed that hand. The same God who split the Red Sea for his people will part whatever holds you captive. The pit may look closed, but heaven knows every hidden path. David's words, "You did not let my enemies rejoice over me," reveal a truth that transcends time. God's hand not only delivers but defends. He does not simply remove you from danger. He ensures that the enemy cannot claim victory over your fall. That is divine justice. God does not leave your story open for mockery. He completes it with triumph so undeniable that even those who doubted you must acknowledge his power. When his hand fights for you, vindication is inevitable. It is crucial to understand that this hand does not act according to our impatience, but according to divine timing. The delay you perceive is not neglect, it is alignment. God waits until every hidden motive is exposed, every false friend revealed, every dependence shattered. Only then does he stretch forth his arm, because if he lifts you too soon, you may rise still clinging to what once held you down. But when he lifts you at the right time, no pit can reclaim you. The closure is complete. The restoration permanent. Think of Joseph again, sold, imprisoned, forgotten. Years passed, and it seemed heaven had turned silent. Yet in one day, one act of divine hand, everything changed. The same pit that was meant for death became the story that glorified God across generations. That is the fingerprint of divine intervention. It not only changes your condition, but rewrites your destiny. When heaven fights for you, even your mistakes cannot cancel your future. David himself had fallen through sin, crushed under guilt and judgment. Yet when he cried out, "O Lord, you brought me up from the realm of the dead," it was proof that grace outruns failure. God's hand is not repelled by your weakness. It reaches for you through it. Where shame says, "You are finished," mercy says, "Rise again." The power of that hand is beyond imagination. It can break the invisible chains of anxiety, addiction, bitterness, and fear. It can heal wounds buried too deep for words. It can open doors locked by years of rejection. And when it moves, it leaves no trace of the prison behind. That is why the enemy trembles when you pray, not because of your voice, But because prayer invites the movement of God's hand, there are seasons when you may feel nothing, see nothing, and yet everything is shifting. The silence is deceptive. God's hand often works quietly, in places your eyes cannot see. He is moving people, arranging conversations, preparing outcomes that align with your calling. And then suddenly, when the appointed time arrives, everything unfolds at once. The pit closes, the light returns, and you realize that what felt like delay was divine precision. This is how heaven fights, not with noise or spectacle, but with perfect wisdom. While the enemy plots, God prepares. While darkness digs a pit, God designs your escape. While others doubt, He fortifies your faith. Every disappointment becomes material for your elevation. Every loss becomes seed for greater harvest. The same David, who once cried out in fear, later declared with confidence, "You have established me as a mountain of strength." That transformation did not happen overnight. It was the result of God's hand rebuilding what life had broken. When He lifts you, He also stabilizes you. He does not raise you to fall again. He teaches you how to stand. He turns you from a wounded soul into a warrior of praise. And that is the ultimate sign that heaven has fought for you, not merely that you escaped, but that you emerged changed. You no longer live from fear, but from faith. You no longer need validation from others because you have seen the power of divine rescue. The hands that once trembled in despair now rise in worship. The truth is, God's hand never fails those who wait for it. There are no accidents in His reach. He knows how deep the pit is, how heavy the burden, how fierce the attack. And still, He never hesitates. When the appointed hour comes, the same God who spoke to the storm, "Be still," will speak to your chaos. He will silence every lie, heal every wound, and lift you higher than you ever were. But you must allow His hand to lead. Too often believers fight against the very process that is meant to save them. They want God's lifting without His pruning, His victory without His discipline. Yet His hand cannot bless what it first does not correct. When He fights for you, He not only defeats your enemies, He defeats the parts of you that align with them. Pride, fear, anger, doubt. His victory is total because His love is complete. That is why the psalm says, "His anger lasts only a moment, but His favor lasts a lifetime." The moment of correction is brief, but the outcome is eternal. The pain of discipline cannot compare to the peace of restoration. When His hand is upon you, it is not always gentle, but it is always good. It breaks to rebuild, wounds to heal, humbles to exalt. Every believer who has truly been lifted can testify to this truth. It was not my strength, my wisdom, or my effort. It was God's hand. You can study, plan, and prepare, but until heaven moves, nothing moves. And when heaven moves, everything must obey. That is why it is better to have one touch from God than a lifetime of human help. His touch ends what years of striving could not. When God's hand fights for you, even the environment begins to change. What was once hostile becomes favorable. What was closed begins to open. People who ignored you are moved to remember you. Situations that seemed immovable suddenly yield. It is not coincidence, it is providence. The invisible has touched the visible. The eternal has entered time. In this divine battle, you are not a spectator, you are the vessel. God does not merely fight for you, He fights through you. Every prayer you whisper, every praise you release, every act of faith becomes a channel for His power. The enemy fears believers who understand this truth because they no longer react to attacks. They respond with worship. Worship is the battlefield where heaven wins. David learned this secret in the wilderness, in the caves, in the pit. Every psalm he wrote became a weapon. Every melody became warfare. When he sang, demons fled. When he worshipped, armies lost strength. That is the legacy of those who let God fight for them. They become living instruments of victory. So when you face your next battle, remember, you are not fighting for victory. You are fighting from victory. The outcome was decided before the war began. The hand that lifted David is the same hand that upholds you. It cannot fail, because it carries the marks of eternity. Even the pits you fall into are known to that hand. They are not surprises, they are assignments. God allows you to see the depth of darkness so that when you rise, you will know there is no place his hand cannot reach. And that revelation changes everything. You no longer fear the pit because you know the deliverer. You no longer doubt the night because you trust the dawn. The believer's power is not in avoiding trouble, but in standing unshaken when trouble comes. It is not in escaping pain, but in seeing purpose through it. Because when God's hand is upon you, even suffering becomes sacred. It refines you, shapes you, and reveals his glory. The story of Psalm 30 is not one of survival, but of transformation through divine intervention. It tells of a God who does not merely observe, but intervenes, who does not abandon but accompanies, who does not only lift but establishes. His hand is not symbolic, it is real, active, relentless, and once it moves, no force in creation can resist it. If you are waiting for that hand, hold your ground. Do not give up because of delay. Every second of silence is pregnant with purpose. When heaven moves, it does so perfectly. And when it moves for you, the whole world will know. So keep your eyes on the Lord. The same hand that lifted David, that broke chains for Paul, that healed lepers and calmed seas, is stretched toward you even now. Its grip is steady, its reach endless, its strength absolute. When it closes the pit, it closes it forever. When it raises you to stay. And when it fights for you, it leaves no doubt. God alone has done this. If this message has touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Remain connected to the word that reminds your spirit that heaven still fights for you. From the pit to the praise, living as a testimony of God's deliverance. There is a sacred moment after every deliverance when the believer must decide what to do with the miracle. God has lifted you, restored you, sealed the pit, and broken the chains. But what comes next? Psalm 30 gives the answer. You must live as the testimony of the one who saved you. I will exalt you, O Lord. David begins, not as an introduction, but as a lifelong declaration. It is the anthem of a man who knows that his survival was not chance, his joy was not self-made, and his freedom was not his doing. Every breath became worship. Every step became remembrance. Every word became gratitude. That is the destiny of those whom God lifts, to live not for their own glory, but as living proof that he reigns. The pit is not the end. It is the birthplace of praise. You are not called to return to life as it was before. You are called to walk in the awareness that everything you have is a gift sustained by mercy. The believer who has been truly lifted cannot remain silent. Silence belongs to the grave, but the rescued must sing. David says, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. In those words lies the greatest purpose of deliverance, that our lives might glorify God forever. When God rescues you from destruction, he does not intend for the miracle to fade into memory. He intends for it to echo through your existence. Your daily walk becomes a continuation of that psalm, a life that declares, God did this. Even your scars, the ones that once brought shame, become sacred symbols of grace. They tell the story of pits that were closed, of prayers that were answered, of nights that gave way to morning. The world may not understand your worship, but they cannot deny your transformation. There is a peculiar power in the praise of the delivered. It carries authority that theory cannot produce. It is one thing to know God in Scripture. It is another to know him in the pit. When you have seen his hand pull you out of darkness, your praise carries the weight of truth. You are no longer repeating what others have said about him. You are proclaiming what you have lived. That is why the testimony of the redeemed shakes the foundations of hell. The enemy can argue against theology, but he cannot argue against transformation. Living as a testimony means that every decision, every word, every action is filtered through remembrance. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" but "What glorifies the one who lifted me?" You no longer walk in fear of falling, because you walk in the awareness that even if you stumble, His mercy is greater than your weakness. The believer who has seen the pit and been lifted knows that life is not sustained by performance, but by grace. That knowledge produces humility, and humility produces power. David's restoration turned him into a worshipper of unmatched depth. His psalms were not written from comfort, they were carved out of experience. He knew what it meant to cry out with no answer, to wait in silence, to feel forgotten, and then suddenly to be lifted by a mercy that defied logic. That experience shaped his heart. The same man who once wept in caves later danced before the Ark of the Covenant. That is what happens when you live as a testimony. Joy replaces shame, gratitude replaces pride, and freedom replaces fear. When God delivers you, He entrusts you with responsibility. You become a vessel of His story. Your life must now reflect His light in a world that still dwells in darkness. Many believers stop at deliverance and forget the mission. They think being lifted is the end, but it is only the beginning. God does not lift you for your comfort. He lifts you for His kingdom. He places you where your life can reveal His glory to others still trapped in their pits. Your praise then becomes ministry. It becomes the bridge between heaven and the hurting. When you speak of what God has done, you are not boasting, you are building faith. Your testimony becomes prophecy, proof that what He did for you, He can do for them. That is how heaven multiplies victory, through the words of the redeemed. The book of Revelation says, "They overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Notice that victory was not sealed by battle, but by witness. Testimony turns deliverance into dominion. To live as a testimony is also to live with awareness of purpose. You begin to understand that nothing you endured was wasted. Every pain was preparation. Every disappointment was divine direction. Every closed door was protection. The pit was not punishment, it was preservation. God used it to isolate you, refine you, and position you. And now, as you walk in freedom, you carry within you the wisdom of that journey. This awareness changes how you face new challenges. You no longer panic when adversity comes. You remember the hand that lifted you before, and you know it will lift you again. That memory becomes your weapon. Fear cannot thrive in a heart that remembers deliverance. You say, "If He closed that pit, He can close this one too." Your past victories become present courage. David's life teaches us that gratitude must be continuous. "You have turned my mourning into dancing," he said. "You have clothed me with joy." Those words describe a life that has moved beyond survival. Mourning was the night, dancing is the morning. Joy is not the absence of trials, it is the awareness of presence. The joy of the restored believer is not fragile because it is anchored in memory. You know too much of God to ever doubt Him again. Even when darkness tries to whisper, you have the evidence of His faithfulness written all over your story. To remain a testimony, you must guard your praise. The world will try to silence it. People will mock your faith, question your devotion, belittle your worship. But do not let the noise of the world drown the song God placed in you. Remember, silence is what the pit demanded. Praise is what your deliverance deserves. The louder you worship, the more you remind the enemy that he lost. There is also a sacred cycle in this. The more you praise, the more God lifts. The more you lift His name, the more He exalts yours. That is why David said, "You have made me secure as a mountain." Praise strengthens the believer. It builds spiritual immunity. The one who praises in every season cannot be easily shaken, because praise keeps the heart aligned with heaven. Your life then becomes an altar. Every moment, every conversation, every act of kindness becomes worship. The pit taught you dependence. Praise teaches you devotion. The same hands that once reached upward in desperation now rise in celebration. You have moved from pleading to proclaiming, from surviving to shining. But remember, the greater the light, the greater the responsibility. The testimony of the delivered is not meant to bring pride, but compassion. You know what the pit feels like, so you're called to help others out of theirs. That is how the kingdom of God expands, one lifted soul helping another. Your restoration becomes someone else's revelation. Never underestimate the power of your story. Somewhere, someone is praying for the same miracle you once received. They are in their night of weeping, waiting for their morning. When they hear what God did for you, hope returns to them. That is how the testimony multiplies, through your willingness to speak. Do not hide your deliverance as if it were private. The pit was public, and so must the praise be. David's psalm continues to inspire because he did not keep his rescue secret. He wrote it, sang it, shared it. He turned his pain into poetry, his grief into glory. Generations later, believers still draw strength from his words. That is the eternal power of testimony. It outlives you. It becomes scripture in someone else's heart. To live as testimony also means living in constant awareness that everything you have belongs to God. The house, the health, the peace, all of it is grace. This awareness breeds generosity. You begin to bless others freely because you remember how freely you were blessed. You give not from abundance, but from remembrance. The pit broke your pride. Now gratitude shapes your giving. There will always be voices that try to remind you of your past. But let them speak, because every time they mention the pit, they confirm the miracle. The fact that you are no longer there is proof of God's intervention. You do not need to defend yourself. Your life is the defense. You are walking evidence that God's mercy triumphs over judgment. And yet, even as you celebrate, never forget the humility of your beginnings. The lifted heart must never forget the pit, not to dwell in guilt, but to remain grounded. Gratitude is sustained by memory. Forgetting the pit is the first step back toward pride, and pride opens the door to another fall. Keep your eyes on the hand that saved you, not on the heights it placed you. The mature believer learns to balance remembrance with rejoicing. You remember the depths not to relive them, but to praise the one who conquered them. You dance not because life is perfect, but because grace is real. You sing not because the war is over, but because victory is certain. That is what separates worship from noise, awareness. Psalm 30 ends as it began, with thanksgiving. The structure itself is prophetic. It begins in darkness, ascends into deliverance, and concludes in everlasting praise. That is the pattern of every believer's story. We enter life through struggle, we meet God in surrender, and we end in glory. Every tear, every fall, every victory forms part of the same song. The pit you endured was never about destruction, it was about revelation. God wanted you to know him beyond words, to know his patience, his power, his presence. You were not just rescued, you were transformed. You no longer see life as before. You see purpose in pain, wisdom in waiting, beauty in brokenness. That is how the lifted walk, not in bitterness but in blessing. As you continue your journey, keep singing your psalm. The world may forget what God did for you, but you must not. Each morning, whisper gratitude. Each night, declare faith. Each trial, remember the pit and how he closed it forever. This remembrance will anchor you through every storm to come. And when new pits appear, and they will, do not fear them. For now you know the one who commands them to close. You know that no darkness can swallow the soul God has lifted. You have seen his hand once. You will see it again. His faithfulness does not expire. His mercy does not weaken. His promises do not break. So lift your eyes, child of God. Live as proof that he still rescues. Let your very existence preach what words cannot, that every weapon formed has failed, every curse has been reversed, and every pit has been sealed. Walk as one who has seen the impossible undone. The psalmist's story is your story now. You were weeping, but joy came. You were falling, but grace caught you. You were buried, but resurrection found you. And now you stand, not by might, not by merit, but by mercy. The pit is closed, the chapter is sealed, the testimony has begun. Your life is the psalm now. Sing it loudly, live it boldly, and let every breath echo David's final words. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. If this message has awakened gratitude in your heart, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Stay connected to the word that keeps your praise alive and reminds you that every pit you faced is now closed forever.